everyone, Joe from Central Jersey Conrail and N, and welcome to episode 15. So today we're going to be starting a three-part series for episode 15. What you're watching now is going to be part 1, and part 1 is going to be focusing on preparation for laying track, consisting of installing your sub-road bed, your cork road bed, and prepping all the surfaces. And also the other purpose is you're going to follow along us putting track down from the helix all the way down to Lakewood. Then we're going to follow on in 3 weeks from now with part 2, and part 2 is going to consist of laying track from Lakewood to Freehold, and the focus of that is going to be the actual laying of track, putting the track down, installing your feeders, and putting in your turnouts, and etc. And 3 weeks after that, we're going to follow up with part 3, and part 3 is going to focus on installing your fascia and how to and all the associated equipment that's going to go up on the fascia. Okay, so let's get to work and start laying some track.
First step in the process is to lay out brown craft paper on the benchwork. Then, using my paper turnouts and all my mock-ups, I go ahead and draw out a rough track plan. Once this is accomplished, I then sketch out a rough outline for the sub-road bed. I then create a template from the craft paper by cutting along those sketch lines. Then, using this template, I cut my sub-road bed out. For my sub-road bed, I used 1/2-inch birch plywood. I went with birch plywood because it's very stable and it doesn't warp. The only drawback is the birch plywood is kind of pricey. When I bought the plywood, it was $39 a sheet at Home Depot. Another alternative you could consider is a 1/2-inch pine plywood. It's a little cheaper. Once I cut out the plywood, I then attach it to the benchwork using risers. My risers, I use 1x4s and 2x2s. I put a riser on every joist. This way the road bed is supported and doesn't sag anywhere. I'm using 2-inch coarse thread drywall screws. For my riser height, I use approximately 2 to 3 inches of gap between the benchwork and the sub-road bed. This way I have room for the tortoise switch machines. This is one of the joints for the plywood. It's just a piece of plywood and some screws and glue to hold the two pieces together. At this point, I start laying out my track plan right onto the plywood. I take my time and I mark out all the center line for the track and also the center line for the turnouts and the points for the drawbars. I'm also taking time to make sure I test fit everything before I go ahead and draw out the track plan. Once I get everything laid out in pencil, I go over it with a permanent marker. This way it's nice and dark and it's easy to see. At this point, I'm just making notes right onto the sub-road bed, and I'm just marking the location of the feeders and the district boundaries. In this view here, you can see all the screws that I used to mount the sub-road bed to the risers. Just make sure that you're countersinking all your screws so they don't protrude up above the plywood. In this view here, you can see the staging area for the Southern Secondary. We'll go over how I constructed this in part 2. first thing I do is I take a bunch of cork and I put it into a bucket of water and let it soak. Soaking the cork in the water softens it, so this way that you can manipulate it around curves. Now I begin laying the cork. All I'm doing is I'm putting down carpenter's glue, and then I'm laying the cork down and following the centerline markings that I've made. Once I get the cork in the position that I want it, I go ahead and I hold it down with push pins. Generally, when I'm laying cork, when I approach a turnout, I take one cork and I put it on the diverging leg of the turnout, and the other side of the cork goes straight, and then that leaves a V, and then what I'll do is I'll come back and I'll fill that V in with the other side. This is a common technique for laying down cork. There's many different ways to lay your cork down. Generally, what you want to do is just keep it flowing so it's nice and smooth, stagger your joints, and avoid any kind of big bumps in the cork. However, if you do end up with some high spots in the cork, don't worry, I'll show you how we sand that down. Now, there's different materials out there now for doing roadbed. There's, the Homosode, and then there's the foam from Woodland Scenics. But I don't know, there's just something nostalgic with me with using cork roadbed. The smell, the way it feels, the way it looks. So I just figured I'm just going to go with what I know, and I stuck with cork roadbed. Once I get the cork down, I let it dry for approximately 24 or more hours before I proceed to the next step. Now what I do is I take a Stanley Sureform rasp and I work the cork over. What I'm doing in this process is I'm hitting any high spots or any cork that's sticking up. I'm also concentrating on the shoulders and getting the profile nice and the way I want it. Also, I'm taking care of any inclines from when we're changing track levels. Here you can see that I'm working the Glidden spur, and I'm taking that rasp and I'm really beating those spur lines up so that I can bring the profile down so that they look more like a siding and not like a main line. Now, once I get it the way I want it, I go over it with my sander just to clean it up and get all them edges nice and smooth. And each step of this process, I'm just taking the time to go back and vacuum and clean up because it gets messy from all the sanding and all that stuff. And the next step in the process is what I do is I take some joint spackle and I go over and I fill in the center line seam to seal it up so it's all looks like one piece. And this serves a couple different purposes. Number one, so when we get to our ballast phase, we don't have holes in the cork where the ballast will fall down in. Second thing it does is it seals up the top side of the cork, so when you go to paint it, it has a nice smooth appearance and you don't get that rough look. And when I'm doing this, I'm just putting a very, very thin layer on top of the cork. The other thing that I'm doing is I'm going along the shoulder there with spackle and my finger to kind of fill in that seam there where the cork and the plywood comes together. So this way that it looks like it's part of the ground, not that it's just a piece of cork sitting on top of the plywood. Another thing I do with the spackle is like here in Lakehurst, the track, there is no drainage ditches in between each line. It looks kind of like it's all one flat area. So I just go ahead and fill that all in with the spackle so it looks like it's just one big wide area. Now the next day when the spackle's all finished drying, I come in with a 220 grit sandpaper and a sanding block, and I really hit that spackle, make sure it's nice and smooth, and I thin it out. And once I clean up the area and get all the sanding dust out of the way, I come in with a gray spray paint and spray it just so we have a base color down underneath the track. And what the purpose of this is, so after we ballast the track, if there's any holes or thin spots in the ballast, you don't see wood or cork underneath, you just see the gray paint. Okay, here we are getting started on track work. So at this point I've given that spray paint 2 good days to dry before I've started laying track. So what I do here is I lay out where the turnouts where I want them to be. I mark the position of the drawbar, I mark the position of the frog wire, and then I'm drilling a 1/4 inch hole for the drawbar and 1/4 inch hole for the frog wire. Once I get the turnouts in position, I connect them up with track and I solder them together and I test them with a free rolling freight car. Once I get the track in the position that I like it and it's all soldered together and I tested it and it looks good, I go ahead and I glue it down. I'm gluing the track down using a latex caulk that dries clear. Now when I'm putting the latex caulk down, I'm putting it on very, very thin. You don't need a whole lot, because if you start using too much, it starts to ooze up between the ties and it'll fill in that gap. So this way when you won't be able to ballast properly. Here I'm drilling holes and I'm running my track bus so I can go ahead and start connecting up track feeders for testing. So at this point for testing, I'm just back feeding through the previous power district, and at a later date I'll go ahead and connect it to the command station. So here we are bringing up a train for testing. So Patrick from the Great Northern Rail Link channel gave me the idea to put these feeders down underneath the rail joiners like this, and I'm very happy with the outcome, so thank you, Patrick. So all I did was I drilled a hole and I put my track feeders in the cork roadbed, glued the track down. Once the latex caulk had dried, I went back and I just pushed the wires up against the rail joiner on the bottom side and used my soldering iron to solder them on. So at this point the main line's up and running through Lakehurst. Now I'm just going back and I'm going to attach the pocket track for the crew change out, and I'm also putting in the spur line for the Naval Station Lakehurst. So in the beginning I thought I would try something different that I hadn't seen anybody use, and I was using my old scuba weights, the bean bags, to weigh the track down. The only problem was that the fabric was sticking to the latex caulk, and when I was pulling it up, it was tearing up the paint and all that stuff. So I just went back to using what everybody else uses, using Campbell's soup cans. Here I am now installing a track bus underneath Lakewood. I'm starting to install the track for the Glidden spur. Now the Glidden spur is going to be a rail line that serves the sand pits in Jackson. So what I'm doing here is that the cork is kind of profiled down, so after it makes that little curve, it's going to get real where there's no profile. And then what we're going to do is we're going to ballast over the track with sand so that you don't see the ties or the ballast or anything like that. Now Now, if you've never glued your track down, let me give you this tip. Take your time. Once you get the caulk down and set the way you want, you have plenty of working time to manipulate the track, get it straight, check it with a straight edge. If them ties are skewed or there's too many gaps with the ties, use a tool to slide them ties and close the gaps up. So, just take your time, and you have plenty of time before that caulk sets up. Here we are starting to lay track in Lakewood. One of the things you got to consider when you're laying out your track is where you're putting your turnouts. Make sure you're testing with your whatever switch machine you're using underneath to make sure there's clearance between the risers. I set this track level 2 to 3 inches above the joists and the bench work so that I didn't have to worry about the switch machines hitting the top of the joists. So here I'm getting set up to put that turnout in. I drilled the hole for the drawbar, the hole for the frog, and 2 holes for track feeders. And here I'm soldering the wire to the frog underneath to power the frog. A lot of things you read or you see other people doing track work, when it comes to complicated interchanges and where you put a bunch of switches together, people like to do it at the bench and bring it over to the bench work. I don't know, my personal opinion is I just like to work at the bench work where I'm at, so this way, like I said, I know where my risers are, I know what the cork row bed is, and I just work right there where I need the track to be. Okay, so now we got track running up through Lakewood, so we can continue testing.
Okay, everyone, so that puts a wrap on part 1. So we got track down, running into Lakewood, trains are running, I'm testing everything now, and there's tweaking that needs to be done. Some of the points are not working, because there's no spring tension on it. Also, I found some track that was out of gauge, and we're having some derailments, but that's all it's all a growing process, and it's just little pains that you have to get through when you're putting everything together. So as of right now, I've already started laying cork for the section from Lakewood down to Freehold. So part 2 will be coming along very shortly. So one of the things that everybody may have picked up on in part 1, and probably everybody has a lot of questions right now, is about the staging area for the Southern Secondary. But we're going to cover that in detail in part 2, because the reason I'm putting it into part 2 is because where that ties into the main line is down near Freehold in the Farmingdale section. So that's why I kind of just breezed over that. But hold your questions. We'll definitely cover that in length in the next part. So one last thing I want to do before I wrap up part 1 here is that I want to give a big shout out to Patrick over at the Great Northern Rail Link. He's been helping me a lot behind the scenes through Facebook and messaging, and he's been kind of giving me some guidance, and I just want to thank him. And I flashed a card up in the video that I want everybody to just go over and check out his Facebook page, because he has a gorgeous layout and he's very, very knowledgeable. He's been probably doing in-scale a lot longer than I have. He's a wealth of knowledge. So thank you very much, Patrick, and thank you for all your help. All right, everyone. That's all I have for episode 15, part 1. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you episode 15, part 2.